that being said, I want to introduce our District Attorney Raul Torrez and our U.S. Attorney Tierney.
So good evening, folks. I got to say, this is the warmest community meeting I've been to in the last couple of weeks. I think they need to open up the windows a little bit for us. I want to thank you for giving us an opportunity to come and meet with you, talk a little bit about what's going on inside the District Attorney's Office, our partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office, answer any questions that you may have about crime, our policies and procedures, our priorities, the things that we're dealing with. In terms of providing everyone with a good context for the challenges that we face as an office, APD, and this isn't counting BCSO, but APD has about 37,000 police contacts every year. About 25,000 of those police contacts result in a referral to our office. Of those 25,000 referrals to our office, approximately 19,000 criminal cases are prosecuted each and every year, and we do that with 100 attorneys. 100 attorneys prosecute 19,000 cases a year. So if you are any good at math, and I'm not, one of the things you'll quickly figure out if you break that number down, we're swamped. We are completely overwhelmed, given the nature and sort of orientation of this office and the resources that have been committed to the office. Added to that is a historical legacy that I think needs to be discussed candidly and openly with the community. Any of you who receive the Albuquerque Journal or have a television set have probably seen the boxes in my office. My mother's friends are constantly coming up to me and whispering if I'm okay and asking if they can come and help me move boxes. Those boxes actually represent closed case files that have been sitting in that office for about 20 years. We didn't have archive space at State Archive. We couldn't get them out of the way. But more importantly, there are 8,000 referred unindicted felony cases currently sitting in the office. 8,000. Which, to give you a proper context, if crime stopped today and there were no new crimes, it would take us about 2.5 years to prosecute all 8,000 of those cases. In order to keep up with the current caseload and dig into that backlog, it's going to take 4, 5, or 6 years to dig our way out. And the most important thing for you to consider, and I'd like to acknowledge Representative Thompson for being here because she's a great representative, and she's also on the House Appropriations Committee, which is very important for the District Attorney's Office because, unlike APD, we are funded at the state level. What I told House Appropriations and the state legislature is that this is a $25 million operation with a $19 million budget. We are $1.8 million under parity with the Public Defender's Office, and everybody here already understands how overwhelmed the Public Defender's Office is. So if you do nothing else, if you have an opportunity to let the legislature know that funding for the District Attorney's Office is critically important for public safety, and why? Because we are the bottom of the funnel. Think about that. If you don't increase the capacity at the bottom of the funnel, it doesn't matter if you have 900 police officers, 1,200 police officers, or 2,200 police officers. If I only have 100 prosecutors, there's only so much capacity we have to initiate and prosecute these cases. And why is that so important? Because putting handcuffs on somebody on the sidewalk does very little to actually impact crime if I can't get all the way to a point where 12 citizens in a jury somewhere say, yes, this person is guilty and they should be dealt with. So it is absolutely critically important that people start to recognize the importance of the sort of missing middle institution, because we talk a lot about the courts and we talk a lot about the police, but there's a big piece of the puzzle that's in between those two. And we have to acknowledge the institutional failures that we are dealing with, try to correct those, and try to come up with some new answers and solutions. This is a good moment to talk about the partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was started under Mr. Tierney's predecessor, Damon Martinez, and we've continued in that partnership. It allows essentially state prosecutors to be cross-designated as federal prosecutors so that we can take certain categories of crimes and specific defendants into the federal court system. And why that's so important is, number one, detention on those defendants is a much, much easier thing to accomplish. Number two, the sanctions that are available to us for specifically violent repeat offenders tends to be much higher. So it allows us to have a real focused deterrent effect on the people that everyone here is the most concerned about. So that's what we've done with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'll turn it over to Mr. Tierney. What I would also like to acknowledge, though, is that this is my former boss before I became the DA. So if I make any massive mistakes, it's his fault. It's his luck. And the other interesting thing, which people should note that I don't talk about often, my dad is one of the longest-serving federal prosecutors in the state, along with Mr. Tierney. So he can tell you stories about me from when I was not yay hot. So.
All right. In about 2012, we were reviewing some issues, and one of the things I think I'd like you to understand or buy is that 20% of the crimes, 80% of the crimes are committed by 20% of the offenders. That's probably an established fact. But what do we do about that? Well, we decided that we could do what we would do what we could with the jurisdiction that we have. Now, he's got 100 prosecutors, I have 38. Those have national security, crimes of Indian reservations, white-collar crimes, and then something called general crimes, which is what Mr. Torrez and I are working on, basically. And this unit in our office handles all kinds of crimes of violence involving firearms. The whole thing is based on firearms. Okay, that's when we started worst of the worst. So in federal court, if you go in and stick up a circuit cable with a firearm, then I can prosecute you in federal court. Now, in truth, I can prosecute you anyway, but we require a firearm. And one of the reasons we do that is because that's what we're trying to do, get rid of firearms, or at least cut down, in order to cut down crimes of violence. So we look at those kind of crimes, and that's called Hobbs Act. We prosecute those. We of course do bank robberies, but if I stick you up on the street, no federal jurisdiction. Right? There's no commercial there, no interstate commerce. And in federal court, a robbery has to delay interstate commerce in some manner, so to speak. If I stick up you and take your car by force using a firearm, I can prosecute you in federal court. If I use a knife, I won't take the case. Okay? So it's focused on firearms, and there's a good reason for that. That's the most violent kind of crime there is, and that's why we target it. And then also we use drug trafficking. We have a lot of jurisdiction there. I work with the police on that. We have certain guidelines. Our guidelines basically are the kind of substance, heroin, cocaine, whatever it is, and what's the amount. Federal law is A is the most amount, 10 to life. B is 5 to 40. C is 0 to 20. And D is 0 to 5. Those are just the levels. Depends on how much of the drug you got and what kind of drug it is. Okay? Those are the basic nexus crimes. We take those crimes and we look at people who have criminal histories that if we prosecute them in federal court, we can enhance their sentence. For example, if Joe Smith had one trafficking conviction, okay, and we get him for something, then we can take that. If we got enough, we'll charge him with a 5 to 40, a B level, and then we'll file something called 851 information, which doubles his sentence to 10 to life. Okay, so that's why we have targeted criminal history. Now, Mr. Torrez and I, and Mr. Martinez, when he was there, got an MOU together, and basically he wants 4, we took 2, and right now they're undergoing their background investigation. Once that's complete, we'll bring them on board. We'll start them 1 day a week. We'll start them in general crimes. It'll take a while for them to get acclimated and get experience in federal court, and we'll bring the other 2 on. We'll have 4. And we have special prosecutors in Roswell, Las Cruces, Farmington, and now we're going to have some in Albuquerque. And we use those, just like Mr. Torrez said, bring them into federal court, gives us another body, another tool gives him the experience of federal court. Also, we have a good way to monitor the cases that come to the DA's office to bring to us, and look at it, and get as many federal prosecutions as we can. But contrary to what a lot of people think, we don't have unlimited resources. I'm under a continuing resolution. I don't have a dime that I can spend. I didn't spend last year, minus 3.5%. So, you know, it's not perfect, but at least we're trying to target offenders that are the most dangerous. And that's what's done the worst, basically. I gave you all a pamphlet that kind of explains the program in detail. That's the nuts and bolts of it.
So with that, I think probably it'd be helpful to answer any questions. I know folks have specific questions. Yes, sir.
One of the problems, I wonder, both of you said that you can enhance the sentence considerably if they're convicted in federal court. Is that because, and my apologies to the representative, but because we don't have the laws here in New Mexico, or we are, I shouldn't say that, afraid to pass laws that will give you the ability to sentence the people the way they need to be sentenced?
So, I'd like to give you a clear-cut answer, but I've got to give you a more complicated answer because I think it's important that people understand both sides of the equation, and something that I frankly campaigned on when I was talking about running for this office. We managed to do two things at the same time in the criminal justice system in America. Okay? You got to recognize one thing up front. We incarcerate more people as a percentage of our population than any other country on the planet, right? We make up 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's inmates. So the first thing you got to recognize is that you're not, and this is somebody who worked for Mr. Tierney and spent a lot of time putting a lot of people in prison for a very long time. We do two things wrong. We over-incarcerate certain people, and in my judgment, under-incarcerate people that present a high risk of violence. So part of my challenge is to take people who have committed numerous armed robberies, who use firearms, who engage in brazen acts of violence, separate them, and frankly remove them from the community for a significant period of time. At the same time, I have to have the ability to recognize that if somebody is a non-violent offender who has an addiction issue, a mental health issue, or some of these other issues, oftentimes what I do is I take some of those people, I put them in prison, and the only thing I do is make them more proficient criminals. And I drop them back into the community with a felony record, which means they're not getting a job, no treatment, no nothing. And it is a matter of time before they go kick in your door. Now we can continue to sort of cycle people through, and we've seen that. I've cycled people through the system before. What we are trying to get to, I think, is a more rational system. And what I mean by a rational system is one that recognizes right off the bat what he and I are talking about, which is, and I'm going to tell you this, and I've told the police department, I've told the community, and I've told the legislature. We simply do not have the resources to investigate, prosecute, and incarcerate every single criminal referral that comes through the door. So what we got to do is separate the bad, the really bad, from those that are screwing up and certainly not doing things that we want them to do, but have, frankly, the political conversation that no one wants to have about, hey, it cost me $50,000 a year to put this guy in a cage, and it's not necessarily getting us anywhere. What am I trying to do on the front end to mitigate some of that, usually at a lower cost and at a lower rate of recidivism? And believe me, as a prosecutor, that is a very delicate conversation and difficult conversation with you all to have, because guess what? You're living in the 5th most violent city in America. The 5th most violent city in America. So I recognize that when I come to you and try to talk to you about being both tough and smart and being targeted and judicious in how we apply our authority, it's a difficult thing to do. But I think it's a necessary evolution in criminal justice. It's a necessary evolution in what the police department does and what prosecutors do, because right now, we have one tool, right? We ignore mental health issues, we ignore drug issues, we don't want to deal with it, we don't want to think about it. You call us to deal with it or think about it. And right now we have one solution, and we use that solution. He puts handcuffs on him, and I put him in jail. The question is, if they're not using a gun and they're not highly violent, am I making you safer? And that's something that we as a community are going to have to start really digging into, and that's just the honest truth. Yes, sir.
I just want to say something positive. Because of what's happened here in the meeting so far. First of all, I'm amazed that I can have a district attorney of a large municipal area come in a fairly intimate setting and speak, and the U.S. attorney, and have a representative here. So I want to say that this is a positive. I'm not thinking of the exact reason why the CPC exists, but this is democracy in action. This is people participating and communicating, not always saying this is the most brilliant thing, but they're speaking what's on their mind. And we have representatives of, and that includes the APD. I mean, where I come from originally, I've been here 4 years, I would never had a chance to have police departments sit here like this for a couple of reasons, the way they are and the way the community is. So it would never be nice enough for them to sit here like this. So I'm just appreciative of the people that come, the board, the people in the audience that participating. I think it's fantastic. That's all.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I have 2 words. Prevention. That's magic word. Why we don't, doesn't matter how much money we put to the system. We have systems such corrupted, doesn't matter how we put. We do not have prevention. That is biggest problem, as I see it. When I got involved that last few years. Thank you.
I'm going to follow up to what he said. I think it's very hopeless. I was born and raised here. I lived in Los Angeles. I never was afraid because I lived in Beverly Hills, but I was never afraid. And we had great little police officers there and all. But I feel very hopeless, and I'm just going to say, everybody, I'm a business person, talks about that everybody in the political system and all, they're all related, and their nephew is the DUI, so they let him off. And I just feel like we could just yell that with the megahorn, like, to Santa Fe or wherever the issues are, and get y'all more funding. What do we have to do to get that? Having a chat with a legislature person who's probably related to the butt rammer that just broke into my car. I'm sorry, I don't care, I'm pissed. And why it's probably warmer up here, like warmer temperament-wise, is because this is like one of the nicest areas in Albuquerque, and we're always getting targeted. I mean, I live in a gated community up here, and I work my ass off to my house. And I'm constantly like, oh my God, okay, what's on next door today, And whatever we have to do to get you funding, we'll do it, but I don't trust them. Like he says, there's no such thing. We talk to them, we vote against them, but nothing happens. It's like nothing's happening. Nothing's changing. And it's not your own fault. We know what it is.
Yes, sir.
This kind of goes to both of you, because you mentioned the equalizer, which is the gun, and apparently that has great motivation and kill people. A friend of mine who's about 8 years older than I, he's older, and he doesn't move as fast. And he and I are thinking of getting concealed carry permits, because he says these young kids are coming around bullying and they go after older people. So, one of the questions is, has concealed carry been a problem for your office, Federal, and your office?
Problem in what respect?
Well, there are 2 issues, 2 examples. That the kid the other day over at the hotel on Montgomery who went over, put a gun in the face of the guy who was driving the pickup, and the guy shot him. Okay? And I don't know what happened to that. And then about a year ago in Walmart, a guy was in there and knifed his girlfriend. And I guess Good Samaritan went over and shot him and killed him. So, Is that a problem from a federal perspective because it was a gun? Is it a problem from your perspective? If I and my friend go get guns and we shoot somebody, you know, are we in a bad way, or are we defending ourselves?
So, but that's legal under state law. I mean, they have a concealed carry statute. It's not illegal. But what you do with that gun is up to you, and it's based on the facts of what happens. So all I would advise you, if you want to get one, make sure you're trained really, really well. That's all I would say, but it's not a per se.
Sir, I always say this in regards to people who want to get a concealed carry. You're under the same scrutiny as a law enforcement officer. If you choose to discharge that weapon, you're accountable for that round coming out of that gun. So if you happen to miss and you unfortunately strike somebody who is not intended for that gun, then you're going to be held accountable, and you have to know the repercussions or the consequence of that action. And Mr. Tierney says it, that you have to be highly trained, and you have to know the parameters of the law, both criminal and civil, and because you're accountable for your actions.
Well, see, a month and a half ago, I was in the park, Quigley Park, and I was attacked by a vicious dog. I was bit by that dog, and my dog was bit by that dog. So now I carry the spray, I carry a bat. So should I upgrade to a gun? So then I'll have 3 ways. Yes, sir.
Addressing dog issues is not in the consent decree. What I'd like to know is if a police officer is accountable, the same as a public citizen is, why are we not doing anything about these cops that have killed Americans, veterans, and citizens in this city? Why are you not prosecuting them? Why did you let Sandy and Torrez go? They committed first-degree murder, and you know it. These police officers need to be in jail. All of these on this list.
I know this
Ma'am,
about character, but I can't. I know the
allow
internal
cross
workings.
comments.
I didn't ask you, ma'am, I asked him.
To comment over each other. Thank you.
So,
But let me ask, how are you and the DOJ going to take care of this problem?
So the first thing that I think people need to understand is the process that we engage in as professional prosecutors. And I know how emotionally charged that case is. I know how emotionally charged all of these incidents of officer-involved shootings are. But there's a couple of things that you need to understand, and you may not like the decision, but I hope you will respect the process. I have an ethical obligation to bring charges when I have a good faith basis for believing that I can secure a conviction by proving beyond a reasonable doubt the guilt of defendants. And in that particular case, what we did was 2 things. We initiated an internal review process by career prosecutors that had more than 35 years of experience. At the same time, we initiated an external process by an entire group of district attorneys that were selected that were both conservatives and liberal Democrats from Santa Fe and other places. Those 2 groups were not in communication with one another. Those 2 groups and their interpretation and analysis of the case happened separate and apart. And we did that for a very specific reason. It's like taking a controlled study of a group of doctors over here and a group of doctors over here. I told no one what conclusion to get to. I said, you give me a recommendation based on the facts and evidence. You give me a recommendation based on the facts and evidence. They went through thousands of pages of documentary evidence. They reviewed all 17 days of that trial. They reviewed and looked at all of the pleadings and argument that was presented and prepared by someone who is frankly widely regarded as one of the best trial attorneys in the state. And what they concluded is that after a year of preparation, one of the best attorneys in the state presenting every possible conceivable scrap of evidence to a jury that was selected from this community was only able to convince 3 people on that jury of guilt. Was that determinative? No. But it's something that a professional prosecutor has to look at very carefully. In addition, and I don't know if you've done this, but I encourage you to do this. Go through and read the specific jury instructions. The specific jury instructions, because I can't make judgments based on emotion. I make judgments based on the law. And here are a couple of key instructions that came in that case. Number one, you are not to consider the availability of other means of non-lethal force present at the scene. Didn't matter if there was a taser shotgun, didn't matter if there was some other way. You are not to consider that. You are not to consider if the officers themselves put themselves in a position of danger, which thereby predicated the need or the perceived need to use deadly force. With those two jury instructions, which I cannot wish away, I cannot change away, given the facts and the law, we made that analysis and we made that judgment. Now, I know people aren't always going to be happy with that. And by the time I'm done with being district attorney, I'm sure everyone in this room, every single one of you in this room, if I'm doing my job right, will have something you will stand up and say, "You are an idiot. How could you possibly get to that conclusion?" And the only thing I can tell you is the judgment is derived from the facts and the law, my ethical obligation, and my experience. And that's it.
Can't
Yes.
play in a rigged card game.
I was curious on with, I'm a native, have relatives that have a business here. I kind of like that we're maybe have a feeling in our backs might be against the wall because it's going to make a better story in the end. With this CASA, there's got to be, we don't have to bring it all up now, but I'm also thinking that we're also breaking new ground on new ways that we're training the officers with crisis intervention training and others that it could all start right here, just like an organization called Crime Stoppers. So I hope that in the years to come that we're going to build upon other things that we're also trying to get started for maybe one of the few cities. So maybe that's something that, depending on the time or next time, that we can kind of keep building upon those pluses.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to try to understand one thing a little bit more. Is when it comes to the judges, don't they have other powers or that they don't, that they aren't using, that they could use to help with prosecuting?
So,
The judge's role is to judge, and to be sentenced over case.
But
It's
don't,
not.
I mean, besides what we've seen them do, don't they have other powers and that they don't call upon themselves to use, things like that?
The judge has a lot of powers. I mean, he can subpoena people, evidence, things, but basically a judge sits in judgment. And he's on one side, I'm on the other. We present what we think is our best case. And he instructs the jury on what they should consider. That's a judge's job. That's where his power derives from.
Okay, so they may sometimes decide.
He may direct me
make some
out.
other decisions when they could decide something else.
Right. In other words, he has the power, and to close the prosecution's case, dismissed.
You mentioned ABQ puts the handcuffs on them and you put them in jail. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the boundaries of the process between what ABB does and what the DA's office does, and take it further through the judicial system? Because I think there's a lot of confusion here about who has what power to do what within the system. And in my view, APD is continually pointing the finger at someone else. We keep hearing about this. And I'd like some information presented as opposed to speculation.
sure. So, the best way to describe it for the folks that are uninitiated, and hopefully most of you are uninitiated in the criminal justice system, is it is effectively like an episode of Law and Order. Their responsibility is, number one, to provide public safety, to show up when there's a 911 call for help, right? To make sure that public safety is ensured. Number two, to conduct an investigation and effect an arrest if they believe that either a misdemeanor or a felony crime is taking place. There's a lot of work that has to happen on the investigative side, separate and apart from intervening in an emergency situation. They prepare a case. After that case is prepared, it is referred, meaning it's sent into my office for prosecution. My office has the authority, makes the determination about whether or not there is sufficient evidence to proceed with any given prosecution. And we do that based on two things, and we've effectively and admittedly failed to do this adequately for a very long time, which is this. We used to take every single case that hit the door, everything that came through the door, we would charge and charge and charge, and we would try to make the case. And consequently, the 3-year average of the conviction rate in my office is 44%. 44%. The national average is close to 90%. Okay? Which tells you a couple of things. Number one, we are accepting certain cases for prosecution that we probably shouldn't. And I've had this exact conversation, in case you were wondering, I've had this exact conversation with the police department. Number two, even on cases that we can proceed on, and this is the harder thing to talk about with this kind of group, but you deserve honesty, because we don't have the resources to effectively prosecute every case, I have to triage cases. What does that mean? That means this child rape case is more important than this residential property case. I would love to do all the residential property cases, all the narcotics cases, all the quality of life cases, all of those cases. But you are dealing with a criminal justice system where you have attorneys in my office who pay out of pocket for trial exhibits. In Mr. Tierney's world, when you say, I need an expert to prove this claim, a specialized scientific expert to talk about trauma or DNA or anything else, guess what happens? I get it. I worked there. I never had anyone say, you don't get to call that expert. You need it, we'll find it, 10,000, 15,000, 30,000, no problem. In my world, that's the real life consequence of failing to fund these institutions. Okay? So part of what we need to do is develop a system and a strategy built around what we call, it's a data-driven approach. Those 25,000 cases that hit the door every year, here's a secret. Are you ready? We don't have a database. No one in my office can definitively tell you who the 500 most violent offenders are at any given time. They can tell you that after they've killed somebody, but they can't tell you that when they come in on a felon in possession of a firearm case. They can't tell you that. There's no risk assessment that goes into this. So we're like a blind man in a room with an elephant trying to feel what's going on with all of these cases. We use word perfect. We use word perfect in my office.
You ran for office of your own volition?
My family asked me that. They don't have their own cell phones. They don't have laptops. They don't have Wi-Fi connectivity in the courtrooms. We don't have real-time data exchange of all the Pell cameras. We print out discovery for private defense counsel. We burn disks. The rest of the world is putting everything in the cloud, receiving everything electronically, delivering everything electronically. We have none of the technology and IT infrastructure. Not only do we not have the infrastructure, we don't have the money to train the people even if we had the infrastructure. So when you see me on the news saying this is a crisis, I am not doing it because I like to just be on the news saying this is a crisis. I would love to come in front of you and say, we got it. It's fine. We got everything we need. We are a long, long way from that. Yes, ma'am.
So I have two things. One is you were saying you have one tool, and that's to put someone in jail. It would be nice if we could brainstorm that and find other tools. Like we used to have people having to enlist in the military.
I've got some ideas for you, but go ahead.
Good. The other thing is, while I agree, rape of a 4-year-old child is much more important than a residential burglary, I think we have a real storm brewing here with residential burglaries. Because every day we read about one where an alarm goes off and a thief walks out the front door with all the goods, and we never see anything about the thief being captured. So all of us homeowners are thinking, well, we need to do something to protect our stuff. Do we need to do pepper spray, or what do we need to do to keep our homes safe? Because they're not getting captured and caught and prosecuted and put in jail.
I think the police can probably give you more direction as to the right safeguards you need to have to safeguard your person and your property. What I would tell you from our standpoint is we're moving to a strategy that's called Moneyball prosecution. This is what Mr. Tierney was talking about. 20% of the criminal population is responsible for 80% of the crime. But the key is I have to know who they are. In this community, here's an interesting statistics. 25% of all police contacts. Only 1,200 people are responsible for 25% of all their contacts. But we don't systematically identify who those people are and then understand, hey, this residential burglar is different than this one, right? We don't use independent, empirically assessed risk assessment tools to help us allocate resources. What we do is we put people in buckets of crime. That's how this office has been organized. Rather than organizing it around the seriousness of the offender. That's the biggest change that's about to happen in that office. Is putting all those people at the top. Yes, sir.
Yes, let's stay at the federal level, jurisdiction.
Okay.
Okay. My question is, okay, first I seen it over and over many times, video and audio. Cindy and Perez. How can you tell their life was in danger? Facing this guy alone and surrounded by so many cops with MK and so on, pointing guns at him. I'm sorry, I just can't buy that. These two cops' life was in danger. Neither dog. What is training? And what is APT training? I remember 50 years ago, cops used to with baton, charge, with fist, basically, take somebody down, tackle. He had two small paring knife, That I related 50 years ago or so. So that is, I have problem. Don't tell me it's not politics involved. It is lots of politics in this trial. Judge had deal. Then Sam Bregman, attorney, that was just simply show. Sam Bregman show. I'm sorry. So that I want to just bring it, You just have to face the truth. Don't play politics. In the criminal cases, doesn't matter if that civilian or cop should be on the same level.
Sure, I respect completely your opinion, and
I'm sorry. I've seen it so many times.
I understand that, but I want you to understand my perspective because I think it's really important. I don't make this decision, and I don't make any decision based on that. I'm the one who has to pick up the phone. I'm the one who has to pick up the phone and call his family member and call his brother and explain that to him. Right? And no. There's a difference between actually having that responsibility and living with that responsibility and living up to your ethical standards and applying the law and the facts as you see it, and responding based on how you feel. And I respect how you feel, but what you have to understand is I am obligated to focus on what I can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? And what I will tell you is that decision is not a political decision.
Well, I'm talking about video. What I saw and audio, what I hear.
Mr. Torrez and Mr. Tierney, I really want to thank you guys for coming out tonight. It is 8 o'clock, so we're going to have to cut off questioning and comment now. I really want to say, as a comment here, and I don't want to get too political, but I think that we should all be really hopeful that we have a new district attorney, and you know, it sounds like we have a data-driven approach, something that is fresh and new, and that certainly can't be a bad thing coming from where it sounds like you're coming from. So I hope that this partnership between the federal and local level here can grow, and I think that as citizens, we need to do everything we can to support these guys. I'd remind you that the legislature is going into a special session any day now because the governor vetoed a budget that the legislature passed, which I believe included extra funding for the judiciary. I'm not advocating one position or another, but I think that all of us need to be involved in that conversation with both the governor and your legislator in demanding that these important positions be funded fully. So thank you guys for coming out tonight.
Tomorrow, Mr. Torrez is going to be in Santa Fe before the Supreme Court with his petition to the Supreme Court asking for them to give an interpretation of the amendment that was passed by voters in November. Can you just briefly make a statement?
So the amendment granted judges the authority that they didn't previously have to detain individuals without bond pre-trial. It passed by 87%. And we are in an odd situation because the Supreme Court has not finalized rules to dictate the exact parameters of the policy. As a former federal prosecutor, it was my assumption, based on persuasive authority in the federal rules, which is the model for this new system, that we could proceed by proffer, which means we can present evidence to any judge for them to consider. The defendant could present their evidence the same. Pre-trial and probation could talk about a criminal history, and the judge could make a decision about detention or not. We have moved in the 800 or so cases, felony cases that have happened in the first part of the year. We've moved for detention only 76 times. It's been granted 22 times. And the core of the dispute, as least as articulated by the district court, is their insistence that we start putting live witness testimony into these proceedings. And the reason that our office is not going along with that is because, in part of what I just told you, every time I take a detective out of the street and sit him in a detention hearing for 4 or 5 or 6 hours, that has a direct impact on our ability to control crime. Number one. Number two, there isn't any case law or constitutional provision that mandates this process, because due process in the criminal system is a flexible standard. So that's the technical argument that's before the Supreme Court. Regardless of what they decide, this office is going to do whatever it takes after they give us clear guidance to make sure that we maximize the number of people, the small number of people that deserve pretrial detention. So that's how my day will start tomorrow.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you all next month. Good night. We will have APD crime labs. Everybody there talking about camera policy.